Good evening, Who Dat Nation, and welcome to another Wednesday night, especially to our Bayou Blitz family. I hope everybody is doing well. I hope everybody and all your families had a happy Easter. I am Bob Rose. I am one of your co-hosts to tonight's Bayou Blitz podcast. Joining me is my partner and my friend and a man who's in much better shape than I am, Brendan Boylan. How are you tonight, Brendan?
I'm good. I don't know about much better shape, Bob. I put on some pounds. I need to hit the gym. I don't know what kind of shape you were talking about, but no, everything's good.
Torn quad, bifocals, and lack of sleep because of family drama. So that's what I'm doing.
Okay, so I don't have bifocals. I don't think I have a torn quad. Family drama's not really there. Yeah, I guess I am. I guess I am in a little bit better shape, nonetheless. No, we got some fun stuff to talk about. New Orleans Saints draft is right around the corner. We got some exciting news about our show next week.
Mm-hmm.
And some other team in New Orleans is playing a play-in game tonight. As you can see with the jersey swap behind me, the Pels play the Oklahoma City Thunder at 9:30 Eastern, 8:30 Central. So you guys can wait 30 minutes and hang out with us an extra 30 minutes before you put that game on. But no, everything's good here. Everything's pretty swell. The New Orleans Saints are in a spot where mock drafts are coming out left and right. I know you've done your fair share so far, along with some other colleagues over at SNN.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just about that time of year where everybody makes some wild, crazy predictions and hopes for the best. I know your favorite time of year when it comes to all the coverage you guys put together. So looking forward to talking about what the Saints could do here in the first round and what they could be expecting over the next couple weeks.
Yeah, and it is fun. And along those lines, let's get our announcement out of the way early. As far as draft coverage, will give you the most comprehensive coverage, I believe, of any of the Saints news media outlets on the Saints News Network, with our individual draft profiles, mock drafts, what if, potential draft strategies, things like that. But here on the Bayou Blitz next week, which would be April 19th.
Yeah, +7. Yep, you're good. You still got your math with you.
I had to stop and think. Next week is going to be our Bayou Blitz draft preview show. And as special guests, not only will y'all be subjected to Brendan and my genius, but we're bringing in the entire Saints News Network crew. That's right, Kyle Mosley, John Hendricks, and the newly added, our first round draft choice, Ross Jackson, will be joining us, and we are very excited for that. Show's going to be at the same time. We're going to start at 9 p.m. Eastern time, 8 Central. I expect we'll probably run over an hour, but we're going to all pick each other's brains on what we think the Saints will do. Give you some inside scoop, and give you some of our own thoughts. The reason why next week is our draft preview show is because the following Wednesday, April 26th, we will not be having our normal Wednesday night Bayou Blitz podcast because, and those of you that have followed Brendan and I for the last few years know that we have done this. We will continue to do it. Our Bayou Blitz that week will be a 3-day event. We will be with you all 3 days of the draft. We're going to be having special guests pop in and out. Ross and John will be at the Saints facilities. Kyle is going to check in, with us as well, off and on during those 3 days. And we're going to reach out on the horn and hopefully get some of our Bayou Blitz friends, former Saints players, maybe to weigh in on some picks that have been made. That's we're going to give you wire to wire draft coverage, just as Brandon and I have the last couple of years.
And that'll be sponsored by Coffee. Coffee, the official sponsor of the Bayou Blitz.
Folgers and Red Bull.
Draft triathlon? Does that work? Something like that. But yeah, we'll be popping in and out, especially day 3 popping in and out. Night 1 is always a lot of fun. Night 2, it starts getting a little it can get long,
Yeah.
especially if the Saints have 2 early seconds, and then they don't pick again until the third. So the nights like that can get long, but nonetheless, Bob and I try to keep it entertaining for the most part. If you guys think we're boring or lame, you just drop it in the comments, and we figure it out from there. But yeah, for those of you who have tuned in over the last couple of years, thanks for hanging out with us as long as you have, because if I remember correctly, there was one, I think it was a day 3 stream one year where we were live, whether we were actually physically on the air or not, for like 13 hours.
Yep.
Just popping in and out for 13 hours. So it would be like, hey, Bob, I got to run to the grocery store. You mind hanging out for a little bit? And vice versa. So these things are all day affairs, and we're really looking forward to it. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in and get this knocked out. So we asked you guys what you wanted us to talk about tonight, and 45% of you said you wanted us to talk about players with the most to prove. Now, with that, little tweak, just a little tweak. Not so much most to prove, but players that will affect the Saints draft strategy. So they have something to prove to the Saints over the next couple weeks, if they haven't already, on why the Saints should not draft a player of their position, their replacement, what have you. So, Bob, let's start with some of the obvious ones, and then we can kind of segue into some guys that maybe aren't on the radar of people as guys who could potentially be losing their jobs, or at least bringing in some friendly competition for their jobs. I think the biggest and most obvious ones, offensive and defensively, my opinion, you might have some different opinions here. Peyton Turner's the biggest one defensively. If the Saints go defensive end, or in the first couple rounds, obviously they can go and grab a defensive end in round 4, round 5. Probably doesn't affect Peyton Turner all that much. But if they pick a defensive end at 29 or at 40, we're having a different story with how they feel about Peyton Turner. Now, offensively, while I see a lot of people talk about one particular position, we'll get to that position a little bit later, I still have my eyes on receiver with how they feel of the health of Michael Thomas is. Now, I was a big fan of Edwards coming in free agency, but as we addressed the last show, that's a really valuable number 4 wideout. And we made comparisons to some of the number 4s that the Saints have had over the years that have been very valuable to their success, whether it was a guy like Robert Meacham, whether it was a guy like Brandon Coleman, guys of that caliber. But we don't see him being a guy that's going to line up opposite of Chris Olave and make an immediate and huge impact. So if the Saints go receiver at 29 or 40, you're looking at a different story where it is with wide receivers as well. So let's start first with Peyton Turner, a guy that ironically, same size as Marcus Davenport, same trajectory of their first 2 years. Look a little bit alike too. Where do we stand on Peyton Turner? I know I have a spot in my heart thinking, and maybe I'm just the optimist of the two of us, because he was a shocking pick for everybody. Right? I remember doing that show live with you, and we're like, "What the heck?" We're scrambling through papers, and we're like, "We got a 3rd round." I think you had a 3rd round grade on the kid. And I don't even know if I had him as a day 2 pick. So yeah, there was a big surprise there. But we've seen moments and we've seen flashes of what this kid could become. Where do you stand with Peyton Turner?
To me, let's call a spade a spade. Peyton Turner has done absolutely nothing in his first 2 seasons. He has flashed, specifically. 2 games come to mind. His rookie year, early in the year against Carolina, he was extremely disruptive that game. And last year against the Raiders, it felt like he lived in the Vegas backfield. And I mean, he made Derek Carr and Josh Jacobs' life miserable all afternoon. But that's literally the only 2 games where Turner has done much. I think he had an okay outing against Minnesota last year, an okay outing against Atlanta as a rookie. But as a first-round pick, you want more than just 2 really good games and 2 okay games in 34 potential outings. And of those 34 games, he's missed nearly half of them because of injury. And I think what was most telling and most concerning to me was there were 2 or 3 games at the end of last season where Peyton Turner, as far as we knew, was healthy, but a scratch from the lineup. That's telling. When your first round pick is a healthy, non-dress, that tells you that the coaching staff is not very high on this guy. Now that was then. This is now. Obviously, they haven't played any games since the end of the 2022 season. But we don't know how Dennis Allen and new defensive coordinator Joe Woods feel about Peyton Turner. Remember, Cesar Ruiz heading into his 3rd year. Everybody, myself included, were ready to drive into town and pack that man's bags for him and drive him to any destination that wasn't New Orleans, Louisiana. And that's where a lot of people are on Peyton Turner right now. I'm like you. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt to a certain extent because this team did lose Marcus Davenport in the offseason. I know a lot of people are happy about that, but the fact is that when Davenport played, more often than not, he was a handful for opposing offensive linemen. Last year he looked like he severely regressed, so I understand why the Saints didn't make an attempt to sign him back. But as a result, literally every mock draft that you see out there, including my first one, had the Saints picking an edge rusher or a defensive end in the first round or 2. I do believe that, at least on paper, my view is that this is a need for this defense, defensive line in general, tackle and end. Again, most mock drafts have the Saints picking one at each position fairly early in the draft, myself included. The reason why I went defensive end in my first mock draft with the first round pick, Isaiah Foskey out of Notre Dame to be specific, is because, at least according to a lot of the film that I watched, defensive tackle looks to be a deeper position than defensive end. But the Saints have pulled a lot of draft surprises on us in the past. A lot of people attribute that to Sean Payton, and I think that was a big part of it. But remember, Mickey Loomis has overseen drafts for this team since 2004, I believe. So the general manager obviously has a lot of say-so in who gets picked and who doesn't. With Loomis still in charge, along with Dennis Allen and director of college scouting Jeff Ireland, it's going to be very telling. Whether a lot of these mock drafts are right and that this defensive end is a position of need for the Saints, or whether they feel confident about Peyton Turner's development and about the presence of Tano Passanio, bringing him back, and the presence of Carl Granderson. Because remember, too, Cam is still great, but Cam will also be 34 this offseason and heading into his 13th year. Those are a lot of things to take in. Those are a lot of what ifs. If Cam can still play at a high level, if Peyton Turner can develop as they expected, if Carl Granderson continues his trajectory upward, because I thought Granderson played a great season last year, if Tano Passanio can continue to be solid in what looks like a season where he's going to get more reps as the depth chart stands now. Those are the big questions, starting with Peyton Turner. That we're going to find out how the Saints feel, because if they feel confident in all those players that we just rattled off, then the Saints are going to surprise some people by not picking a defensive end in the first 2, even 3 rounds. But again, that's a big what if, and that's going to be very, very telling early in this draft.
Yeah, I think the thing with Peyton Turner, in one game, I wouldn't even say it was a great game, but a great moment was he was credited with the blocked field goal against Atlanta in week 1. Again, not a great game, but a moment in which sealed a victory, right? I think the thing with Peyton Turner is great personality. Seems like a guy who gets along really well in the New Orleans locker room, like fits the mold of a New Orleans Saint locker room piece. Like I said, I mean, is the prototype for what the Saints look for at edge rusher when you look at size, right? You just look at the guys they've drafted historically. I mean, he fits the mold for everything, but hasn't really played well. And it's not even really about it. He just has not played well. And whether that's being deep on a depth chart where you have guys like Cameron Jordan in front of you, a guy like Davenport in front of you, struggled with injuries. I mean, you can make all the excuses in the world, but I think it's true in just about any sport, and you kind of alluded to it already, Bob, is when you hit year 3, you really want to see whoever it is start hitting their stride and showing you, hey, this is the caliber player I'm going to be. Whether that's a Pro Bowl type player, whether that's just a really good player. And this is going to be a do or die year for Peyton Turner, not just in terms of being a starter for New Orleans, but in years 3 and 4 of a contract, you're also kind of auditioning, if you will, for the rest of the league.
Absolutely.
So it's going to be a big year for Peyton Turner. Now, yes, the Saints went and made moves in terms of bringing guys back that they liked. Passanio, Carl Granderson, who a lot of us at SNN were really high on from the jump, and he's really turned a corner. But is that enough in your defensive rotation of that line? And the Saints have done a really good job over the last, I don't know, probably like half decade of having really good depth on the defensive line. And it really was, outside of Cameron Jordan, there wasn't really a star on the defensive line outside of Cam Jordan. It was just a solid rotation of guys. So do you see Peyton Turner being a solid rotational piece for years to come? Or do you see him being a guy that's just going to kind of fall out of the rotation and be a guy you can replace? Because you even look at solid pieces for the Saints over the years. And one of my absolute favorites that injury had something to do with it, but also just guys outperforming him after the injury was a guy like Nick Fairley, who played really well in New Orleans, but got hurt and then kind of fell out of the good graces of that rotation. Has Peyton Turner already got hurt and fell out of the good graces of that rotation? And that's kind of where I'm at and what you were saying with him getting so many it's a basketball term, but I guess it's a basketball night in New Orleans too. He's got a lot of DNP CDs, did not play coaches' decisions. And that's not a good look at all. So I would not be surprised if the Saints go defensive end in round 1 or early round 2. And that's not just a knock at all on Peyton Turner, but that's also saying that the Saints have always been a depth team. And they might even still value Peyton Turner and look at Cameron Jordan, going to be 34 years old, and say, we got to get someone to replace Cam at some point too. And that's where the Saints could very well be in that situation. We'll kind of talk about some guys we like on the defensive side of the ball here in a little bit as well. And hint, at least mine's a defensive end. But
okay, I'll put the gavel in your hand then. Yeah, we just gave the what ifs and the players that would affect players that would affect the draft strategy one way or another. So now you're judge, jury, and executioner. Give me your verdict. Do the Saints address edge rusher at defensive end with a first or second round pick?
Yes, they do. And again, it's not all because of Peyton Turner, because you do have an aging superstar on the other side. But Peyton Turner has not helped his case either.
Yeah.
Right? So you could call it 50-50. I'm going to call it more like 60-40. 60% of it's Peyton Turner. 40% of it is the fact that Cameron Jordan, a future Hall of Famer, mind you, is going to be 34. Performing at a high level still, it's 11 straight years with at least 7 sacks for Cam. But he's not going to, as much as he would come out and say he wants to play forever and he wants to win that Super Bowl ring, and I hope he does, at least to the latter, because he's not going to play forever.
Right.
And Bob, you yourself as a former, professional athlete could attest to the fact, and you just tore your quad too. I mean, I hate to bring that up again.
Running across the damn yard.
You didn't see. I didn't say that. You put that out to the public for everybody. I had the info, and the good reporter in me said, "You know what? That's info I'm going to keep to myself." But you just spilled the beans, man.
Yeah, and I appreciate I appreciate you being willing to keep it under wraps, but I'll call it for what it is. I'm an old guy now. I'm the guy who used to do this and used to do that, and now gets injured playing with my son in the front yard.
Happens, I guess.
I guess.
I'll
But
give you a call in 20 years and let you know where I'm at. Be like, Bob, I understood where you were at.
well, talk loud, because if I got the bifocals now, Lord only knows what'll be going on with my hearing by then. My verdict at defensive end is the same, for the same reasons. Cam, not getting any younger, needs some help up front, needs some complimentary help. Granderson and Passing, a lot of things to love about those guys, but they're not perennial Pro Bowlers. And Turner, I just don't see the development in Turner, and they need more. Just as our friend, the iconic Mike Detillier, always says, there are two things that a football team absolutely craves: the guy that can throw the ball, and the guy that could put the guy who throws the ball on his back. They got the guy that could throw the ball on Derek Carr, and you can never have too many guys to rush the passer. We've already said we both agree that we believe that they'll bring in at least one more defensive tackle through this draft. But again, I like the depth here more than I like at edge. So this is why I think, and again, all this depends on how this draft board shakes out too, on night one and night two. But unless all the edge rushers come flying off the board early, I do agree that I think the Saints go defensive end in the first or second round.
They're almost going to have to. Now let's flip it to the offensive side, and the guy that I think it's fair to say, like I said at the start of the show, is Michael Thomas. I think it's the easiest guy to kind of point to and say, wide receiver could be a need for the New Orleans Saints, because as much as I'm happy Mike Thomas is back, as happy as Bob is that Mike Thomas is back, and as happy as a lot of you are happy that Michael Thomas is back, you got to face the music and realize that Michael Thomas hasn't played more than 4 or 5 games in 3 years. Not his fault. Injuries are a part of the game.
Yeah, he's missed 10 of the last 4. He's played in 10 of their last 40 games.
So there you go. He's played in a quarter of their last 40 games. Yeah, I did math right. Cool. It's late. Got to make sure I'm doing math right. But nonetheless, yeah, I mean, health is a big concern. Not just health, but is he going to be able to return to the form that he was? Remember, at the beginning of last year, he certainly showed that he was still Michael Thomas. But can he count on that again? And how do you feel about the depth behind Thomas and Olave? Obviously, Shaheed had a stellar back half of the season. Obviously, there's some rapport with Edwards and Carr, and you like that. Traquan Smith's been around the program for a long time. Okay. I was waiting for that. And then you have guys behind him that have been, part of the team for a long time, that have continued to find their way back, whether it's practice squad or being wide receiver 5 or 6. So how do you feel about those guys? Personally, I don't see a receiver as much of a need. That was a little difficult to say. As some of the other positions, for example, we just talked about the defensive line. Yes, a need, but this is also not a super strong receiver class.
No.
Right? There may be 1, 2 guys maybe that go in the first round. And then from there, you could probably get some value picks, in round 3 at receiver, some guys you really like in round 3 and round 4. But certainly not at 29 and not at 40. Now, off the top of my head, I can't give you a receiver that I would say, man, I really like this guy in round 3. But I also can't give you a guy that I would be really comfortable with New Orleans drafting at 29 or 40. at receiver. Now, if guys slip, and like we just said, it depends how the board falls, but the odds of a guy that I want New Orleans to draft falling to 29, I don't think it's that high. Bob, where do you see this receiver class? And do you think receivers as much of a need as some people think it is?
I think receiver is a need, but only a certain type of receiver. And yeah, that's pretty much what you were just alluding to. I know a lot of people had, early mock drafts, had Zay Flowers going to New Orleans. Others love Jordan Addison and are talking about, well, what if Addison falls to 29? And I love Addison too. But I look at it this way. Njigba from Ohio State. Obviously, the pipeline, the Buckeye pipeline through New Orleans is strong, and JSN is a heck of a receiver. But when it comes to Flowers, Addison, even JSN, the Saints already have one of them. His name is Chris Olave, and he's a better version than them. And I'm including Njigba when I say that. The type of receiver that I think the Saints need is a big physical guy, a guy that's going to make plays and be a security blanket through the intermediate zone. And you know what? That pass catcher could come in the form of a tight end, depending on who it is, too. It could be either a bigger wide receiver or a tight end. I agree with you. I can't see the Saints reaching for a guy at 29, not when there are other bigger needs, on this team. Even if a guy like TCU's Quentin Johnson, he checks off all those boxes. He's a big physical guy with the underrated athleticism to make plays down the field. JSN, he could stand to add some physicality to his frame, but he's a good possession receiver, great in the slot. Guys like that. I can't see the Saints spending a first-round pick on that. Second round, that might be a different story. In my first mock draft, I had the Saints. I had the Saints picking Cedric Tillman out of Tennessee, who I think is going to be an outstanding pro. Tillman checks off all those boxes. Big, physical, sure-handed, loves to work the middle of the field, very precise route runner. It's that kind of guy who, if the Saints draft, look to in the draft to give Derek Carr a physical intermediate pass catcher. And again, that could come from the tight end position as well. So I don't think it has to be a wide receiver, but I think it's an area that the team is going to address in the draft, probably fairly early. But like you said, the receiver class in general, and this is all the receivers, it isn't considered deep. And when you fraction off part of that receiving class, because you're hoping for a certain type for your new quarterback, that whittles the class down even further, to the point that I suspect that the Saints are only going to be looking for certain names, certain players at this position if they're available in rounds 1, 2, or 3. Now, after day three, teams don't address for need, folks. They're addressing, or they're drafting best possible player for our system, with rounds 4, 5, 6, 7. So when you talk about drafting for need, or paying or staying true to your draft board, we're really only talking about day 1 or 2 here. Like I said, with Alan on Under the Dome last night, and again, receiver. While I think that there are certain names that we could see drafted by the Saints in the first 3 rounds, I'd agree with you and not put a blanket over. This is a need that they're going to address, where multiple players could fill the need. I only think that there's a few players that, if available, we'll see the Saints select. Otherwise, they'll just move to another position on their draft board.
So I think we're in agreement that no, the Saints will likely not draft a receiver in rounds 1 or 2. There you have it.
Yeah, I'd say that. And again, I mocked Cedric Tillman to them. If Tillman is on the board at pick 40, where their second round pick is, depending on the rest of the draft board, I think Cedric Tillman will be a terrific addition, along with some other receivers that I have looked at. But I don't consider it a need. I think they're going to address elsewhere first.
Well, let's talk about this with the last 20, 25 minutes that we have tonight, along with Dot or Drop, which is the best segment in Saints radio in podcasts. But we talked about guys that, players that will impact what the Saints want to do in the draft. Let's talk about some of our favorite players in the draft that would fit the New Orleans Saints schemes, regardless of whether or not it's an absolute need for the New Orleans Saints. I want to do one offensive player, one defensive player, and then we can kind of chat about those guys after we select. So, Bob, if you'll do the honors, give me an offensive player that you would love to see in the New Orleans Saints system that could be available at 29.
Oh, we're going to 29. Oh gosh.
Or 40. Let's say 29 or 40. One of the first two picks.
Okay. I mentioned Tillman in the second round, and I stand by that. As far as offense in the first round, beyond that, tight ends, I've made my opinion known. Rookie tight ends rarely have an impact, and I think Dennis Allen needs, for his job security, he needs these first two picks to have an immediate impact. Let me go offensive line. Osiris Torrance from Florida. I don't think he's going to be there at 29. But I think interior offensive line. Again, offensive line is never. You can never have enough good quality linemen. And we've seen the depth of this position be radically tested in the last 2 years. I don't think the Saints are going into this draft saying, bam, 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 we need a lineman with our first pick. But folks, don't be surprised if it happens. Andrus Peat, you could bank on Andrus Peat missing at least 6 games. And Alan Ulrich joked last night that the over/under on the number of games Pete plays, is 7. That's about right for his career. Plus, he's coming into the last year of his contract. The other guard, Cesar Ruiz, had a fantastic year last year, but is that development going to continue? And whether or not it does, the Saints only have until May 1st to pick up his 5th-year rookie option for the following year. And they haven't done it yet. That's not to say that they won't. But I think interior offensive line is a position that could very well be addressed early in this draft. And while there are a couple running backs that I would love to have, I'm looking at them potentially in the 3rd round or later. I mentioned Cedric Tillman potentially in the 2nd. I can't see any of those guys being 1st-round picks. So, like I said, if you're going to put me on the spot at 29 or even 40, I'm going to say Torrance is the highest graded interior offensive line, likely to be off the board before 29, but you never know with those guard center types. A lot of them can slip. So I'll go him on offense.
Okay. I've also made it known that I don't think tight end is the biggest need in the world for New Orleans. But there's one guy that I think kind of fits the mold of a New Orleans Saints tight end. Now, a guy whose stats don't jump off the page at you at all from his time at the University of Georgia. But a 2-time national champion, 6'7", 265 pounds.
It's a monster.
A monster of a human being. You kind of just talked about guys that could provide physical strength and whatnot as a pass catcher, and it didn't have to be a receiver. I still think he can mold into being a pretty good offensive guy and a guy that can work the intermediate and be an option for Derek Carr or whoever the quarterback is if he ends up being a long-term Saint, and that's Darnell Washington. And you also got to love tight ends that were number 0.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I think Washington would be a really good fit for New Orleans. It would also give you two tight ends that are standing at like 6'7",
Mhm.
6'6", 6'7". And we know the history of Jawan Johnson being able to split out, and obviously his time as a receiver in college also gives you some more flexibility to have both of them in formation
Mhm.
and give you 2 really big targets, where that's the red zone, where that's a third down. I think that would be an interesting pairing. Now, the duo tight ends don't exist like they used to, right? Where you have 2 just awesome pass catching tight ends. I mean, what's the last one that comes to mind, Bob, of just a duo of solid tight ends?
Patriots, Hernandez
I was
and
going to say that
Gronkowski.
too. I was kind of iffy to say that, considering, but
You
yeah,
see, serial killer or not, I mean, he was a heck of a football player.
yeah, Gronk and Aaron Hernandez was probably the last duo tight ends that could hit you from either side. And honestly, looking at the Saints offense over the years, and the last couple years of Drew was different too, but even with a guy like Derek Carr, who also was not a huge big arm type of a guy, worked better in the intermediate. Having
Mhm.
another option like that, I think, could be crucial. Now, do I think that that's the biggest need for the Saints at 29? No. Um, but it's a guy that I think fits the system really well. I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's a reach to draft him in the first round.
You can see it at 29 though,
If the
potentially.
if the board doesn't fall your way, in terms of some of those, defensive ends, like a couple weeks ago we are talking about that kid from Clemson, Murphy, right?
Mhm.
You have mocks with Murphy in like the top 15.
Yeah.
So if you have defensive ends just flying off the board like that, and you get to 29, you're like, we got to pick at 40, and we think there's a guy or two at 40 that we really like that we could get. But we don't know if Darnell Washington or even that tight end from Notre Dame is going to
There.
be there
Yeah.
at 40. If you're sitting there and you're like, I don't know if both these guys are going to last the next 10 picks, but I'm fairly confident the next 10 picks this guy's going to be there. I could see it. It's a stretch. It's a reach. I think you could get Washington at 40. I think you could get Washington into the mid to late second round, just depending on how this thing falls out. But that's a guy I could see at 29 or 40 offensively. Again, tight end's not the biggest need for this team, but
No.
in terms of being a fun fit, I like it.
Is spoiler alert. Look for the Saints News Network early tomorrow morning. That's going to be that's who I'm publishing my draft profile on, Darnell Washington.
There you go.
Uh,
I'll have to read it.
and I'll say this, and and you've echoed this sentiment in recent weeks. Even though very, very rarely see rookie tight ends make an impact as pass catchers early in their careers, particularly their first season. A guy like Darnell Washington is going to be drafted first and foremost for his blocking ability, and he is a ruthless blocker. That's where I think a guy like Washington does make sense early in the draft, first or second round, because he's going to have an impact that way while he develops as a pass catcher. And like you pointed out, you can employ 2 tight end sets where you have a lot of flexibility with Jawan. He doesn't have to come off as an inline tight end, and you can even leave Darnell in for an extra blocker on pass protection and slip him out on a late developing screen or a check down. If you're going to draft tight end early, a guy like that is a guy who's more likely to make an instant impact, even if it just is as a blocker, because we've seen Adam Troutman struggle in that area, and that's what he's on the roster for. Jawan Johnson, he's a willing blocker, but not a great inline blocker because he's basically a bulked up receiver. So yeah, I mean Darnell Washington does make a lot of sense if you're going to take a tight end early in the draft. You need it to be that kind of guy.
Absolutely. And also a couple of weeks ago, we talked about tight ends that had productive rookie seasons, and I threw out the name Brandon Pettigrew. And I have to come back and say, I was wrong. That's another guy who struggled as a rookie that picked it up in years 2 and 3. and I have the stats up just because. His rookie season, he had 30 catches for 346 yards and 2 scores. Nothing very impressive about that, right? But years 2 and 3 with Matt Stafford were 70 plus receptions each year for over 700 yards and 4 and 5 touchdowns, respectively. So, yeah, there is a trend there with first round tight ends struggling their rookie season in terms of the production numbers as a receiver. But you're right, Bob. Darnell Washington has the opportunity to prove to be kind of the all-around tight end. And that's something I think the Saints could really use. Now let's flip it to the defensive side of the ball. Drum roll, right? Because you and I could go a million different directions here, and if we pick the same guy, I might rip my hair out because the odds of that happening are not very high. So, Bob, for you, whether it's 29 or 40, because like I mentioned, depending how the board falls, your plans will certainly change. Who's a guy that you could see in the black and gold next year that gets drafted either at 29 or 40 in April or late April's draft?
Boy, and like you said, the list is extensive, but 98% of that list is it contains defensive linemen. I mentioned defensive tackles, and there are several that I absolutely love. Starting with Mozzie Smith, Cansey from Pitt, and a guy I love is Ika from Baylor. But again, that's just tip of the iceberg for this defensive tackle class. I'm looking at ends, at defensive ends. The kid from Northwestern. I'm seeing a lot of mock drafts, have him going off the board in the first now. So he's a little bit of a late riser. Lucas Van Ness, the kid from Iowa, he slipped a little bit, but he's still a guy that some people are projecting that the Saints trade up for in the first round. And by the way, I believe that if the Saints do trade up, it's going to be for a defensive end. Keon White, fast, hell of an athlete, but raw. Uzoma from Kansas State, a little bit light, but a guy I love is the guy that I had them picking at 29 in my first mock draft, and you don't hear a lot of hubbub about him. Isaiah Foskey from Notre Dame. I watched this kid's film, and he plays like some guy named Cam Jordan, who is pretty darn good. Foskey's a little bit shade taller. He's 6'5", weighs in at 264, so he's a little bit lighter than what Cam is now. But that's roughly the weight that Cam came into the league at. I think Cam came in at 270. But Isaiah has a lot of strength, a great strength-speed ratio. Effort from whistle to whistle on every play, good natural bend around the edge, and a hell of a run defender. I love Isaiah Foskey. I don't think, based off of the buzz, the lack of buzz that we're hearing about him lately, I think that he's a guy that would be deemed as a surprise first round pick if he came off the board in night one, but it wouldn't be a surprise to me. I think a lot of people, a lot of experts that I've been listening to, a couple I've talked to, still expect Foskey to come off of the board somewhere midway through the second round, perhaps even into the end of the second round. So that's about the range where, if you pick that kind of guy at 29, he'd be considered a little bit of a stretch by some, but I think he is an instant fit in a scheme like New Orleans, with the 4-man front, where their ends are expected to, yes, rush the passer, of course, but you're also expected to play a big role as a run defender, and I think Foskey can do both at a high level.
Well, you named my guy in your list of probably 7 or 8 guys.
I know.
But Keon White out of Georgia Tech, and here are the reasons why. And I see him more at 40 than I do 29. He's not a first round pick, but 40 might even be a little bit of a stretch. But if you like the kid, you're going to grab him because I don't think he's going to be there day 3. I'd be shocked if he was there day 3. But here's the thing with Keon White. First off, he's from a small town in North Carolina. So for Brendan's boxes of things, check, like the kid already. But, I was talking about Peyton Turner a little bit earlier being just like a Saints prototype at defensive end in terms of size. I mean, White's the same way. He's 6'5",
Yeah.
he's 285. Here's the other thing is, per the Athletic, this guy has a 9.56 relative athletic score, which is something the Saints have drafted and put almost, I don't want to say like super high, but a lot of these Saints draft picks over the years have scored really high.
Yeah, they have.
In that category. So I think he fits the Saints category that way as well. He's a really athletic guy. I don't think he's as polished as some of the other defensive ends in this class, you might have Saints fans in the comments. Go ahead and roast me, because it doesn't sound like the last three defensive ends or the last two defensive ends the Saints have drafted. Great size, really athletic, not super polished. Yeah, it sounds a lot
eerily familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds a lot like Davenport and Turner, but I think he fits the prototype in New Orleans. He did have a productive year. His senior year, he was second or third team All ACC. I have to go and check again, and he had 7 or 8 sacks. Let's be honest, it's a bad Georgia Tech team, right? When's the last time Georgia Tech's been good?
Was it this century? I don't think
it's been a while since Georgia Tech's been a good football team. So they play in the ACC, which is not the SEC. But shoot, the ACC's got some good football as well. North Carolina, Duke, definitely underrated. Clemson's up there every year. So they definitely have some athletes and some guys that are going to get drafted early on. So I like White. It's more because he fits everything that New Orleans has looked for over the last couple of years. But at the same time, those prototypes haven't exactly worked for New Orleans over the last couple drafts. So that's a guy that I'm looking out for. We'll just have to see what happens. But I think we're on the same page, Bob. It's defensive end or defensive tackle. One of those first 2 picks has to be defensive end or defensive tackle.
And it wouldn't shock me if both of the first 2 picks were each position.
Right. I think offense kind of takes a back seat early on in this draft. Right. And we'll talk about it more certainly next week. And then, while we're actually live during the drafts and as the board falls and going, this is a guy that I really, we might sit there and I can almost put words into one of our mouths. I really like this guy who's falling, but I think the Saints can get better value at this position later in the draft.
Yeah.
And I know that's what's going to happen. You're going to have a receiver fall. You're going to have a tight end that falls and go, you know what? Yeah, I like this kid. I think he's going to be a decent fit for New Orleans if they pick him, but I think you can get better value later in the draft because position ABCD is not as deep and they need to go ahead and address it. And a lot of that's going to be defensive end, defensive tackle, even linebacker, which we haven't even talked about.
Right.
And that's another guy, and we kind of missed out, but we'll pick the brains of our colleagues next week with a guy like, well, how do the Saints evaluate? You and I kind of talked about this before we went live too, is where do the Saints evaluate some of the rookies from last year that didn't play?
Yeah.
In Jackson, DeMarco Jackson at linebacker, small kid, North Carolina. Spartanburg, South Carolina too. Shout out to DeMarco Jackson being a Spartanburg kid. I know that he was actually doing some work with, I think it was the Spartanburg Police Department via Zoom or something like that this week. So he's a small town kid that from towns I'm very familiar with. So where do the Saints evaluate him? Do they feel comfortable with him being and getting some reps potentially if need be? Smoke Monday, who was a huge talk of camp until he got hurt. Yep. Where do the Saints evaluate him? Because the Saints did bring in more safeties in free agency too. Where's Smoke in all of this? So it's gonna be interesting to see how the Saints evaluate some of that moving forward, especially. All right, Bob, last 5 to 10 minutes. It's the best show or the best game on Saints radio and podcast. It's Dot or Drop. T-shirts and hats definitely have to be coming. We don't have a donate button, or I'd say hit the donate button. Let's get some hats and shirts made for Dot or Drop, but we don't have a donate button.
We got to start flashing up our Cash Apps instead of our Twitter
That's
handle.
it. I mean, hey, listen, StreamYard's got another option where you can throw a second line there. So Venmo, Cash App, that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do for sure. But Dot or Drop, going to be, I guess I'll start. Dot or drop. New Orleans drafts. Okay, we kind of talked about it. New Orleans drafts a tight end in the first 2 rounds.
That's a dot. I'm starting to, and again, neither you or I feel that it's a need, but there's a lot of good tight ends at the top half of this class, or top part of this draft class. And I think it's very telling that the New Orleans Saints brought in Foster Moreau for a visit, before his medicals went sideways. And you look at the type of player that Foster Moreau is, a big target, loves to work the middle of the field, physical intermediate type of receiver, who's a solid inline blocker. We talked about Darnell Washington being that type of player. Michael Mayer from Notre Dame is that type of player. Sam Laporta from Iowa is that type of player. So while I personally hope they go another direction, I just named off some, who I think is some players that I think are going to be very talented tight ends. So yeah, I'm going to go drop. I think the New Orleans Saints are going to draft if you'd have asked me in the first 3 rounds, I'd have said absolute dot. I was hesitant in the first 2, but I could see it happening. So I'll go dot.
How about that? All right, throw it right back at me.
Okay, a dot or drop. Texas running back Bijan Robinson starts to slip a little bit. Gets beyond pick. I think Dallas picks at pick 20, so we'll say pick 20. He gets beyond Dallas at pick 20 and is at pick 21. The New Orleans Saints should trade up to get Bijan Robinson.
Drop. And here's why. 1, he's not going to fall. I know you said what if, but if that dude makes it past like 15, I'd be shocked.
Yeah, me
Honestly,
too.
If that guy makes it past like 12, I'd be shocked.
Me too.
And I'm just throwing a number. I don't even know who picks at 12 off the top of my head. I'm just throwing a number out. But here's another reason why is, there's a lot of rumblings about Alvin Kamara and suspension and what's going to happen there, right? But Jamal Williams is locked up for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Like it or not, Kamara's locked up for a while too. And yeah, there's some question marks for behind that. You guys know how I feel about Benjamin. I want to see that guy get as many touches as he can in the preseason because I think the kid has a chance to be a really good, productive NFL player. I'm not talking like Pro Bowl, I'm talking one of those guys you go, man, that guy was undrafted. He had a really good NFL career. That's what I see out of Benjamin. There's still some rumblings and there's still thought in the air about, is Mark Ingram going to come back in like a leadership role? Understanding he's not going to get touches unless somebody gets hurt, but does he come back in like a leadership role type of way? Yeah, I could see it happening. And honestly, for him to come back and play for a 13th NFL season, regardless of what his role is, for a running back is extraordinary in today's day and age to play 13 NFL seasons. And I have to look at the numbers, but if he hasn't surpassed it, he's got to be closing in on 10,000 career rushing yards. Has to be. I'm going to double check that while we're live, just because you definitely know this because you've been around me for so long. I'm definitely a stats guy.
Same, but
he's got to be close if he hasn't.
I think not as close as I thought. Right. I think he's a far cry.
Not as close as I thought. I think you forget he missed games, injuries, and whatnot.
It wasn't in New Orleans for 2.5 seasons.
Right. Baltimore. One of those years in Baltimore was not a good year. The first year was great. Second year was not. Yeah, he's at 8,100.
Okay.
Which is close. It's close, right? He has. I don't think he gets 500 more rushing yards in his career, but even if he gets to 8,500, like that's a really good NFL career. And 65 rushing touchdowns. That's not a Hall of Fame career, but it's a really good NFL career for a guy. And then also we talked about injuries, but we forgot the fact that he was the odd man out his rookie year, right? You go back to his rookie year in New Orleans, he was the odd man out.
First 2 or 3 years, really, he was backfield by committee for sure.
Yeah. So there's question marks there. So I don't see the Saints feeling the need to trade up and get a guy. because I think they're pretty set. Yeah, there's some holes to fill, but they're craters to fill, right? They're potholes. They're not craters. I came up with it off the top of my head. Was that good? Um,
Works for me.
I'll keep it on the running back, because this is a guy that's been mocked in round 3, round 4 to New Orleans. Obviously, local kid is where I'm going with this. Do the Saints take Spears out of Tulane in this draft?
I think it's possible, but Spears specifically, I will say drop. And the reason that I will is I think Spears could go as early as the second round. And I do not, unless is somebody like a stud like Robinson becomes available in the first. I don't think the Saints address running back that early. I do believe that they'll pick a running back. I think they'll start looking maybe around round 3. But I mean, you have Gibbs out of Alabama. Kid I absolutely love is Chase Brown from Illinois, Dwayne McBride from UAB, Spears, Charbonnet from UCLA, McIntosh from Georgia, Abanikanda from Pitt. Should I go on? Because I got about 4. Yeah, I got about 4 more that I would love to have in this system, anywhere from round 3 to 5. If Spears goes as early as what I think he could be, and that is anywhere from midway through the second round into late the second round, I think that's too early. So I would love Spears in New Orleans. I absolutely adore him as a prospect, but I'm going to say drop because I think he comes off the board before New Orleans wants to get a running back.
All right, Bob, I think we got time for one more each.
All right, let's stay local. And I had him mocked to the Saints in round 4 of my first mock draft. But the New Orleans Saints draft Tulane linebacker Dorian Williams.
I think that's interesting. So we just talked about DeMarco Jackson just a little bit. What do the Saints feel? And with that, especially you said round 4.
That's where I had him in my first mock.
Okay, yeah. So you alluded to it as well. When you get to day 3, it's not about need at that point. Let me get a guy that's going to fit our system and is best available on the board, regardless of position, for the most part. Occasionally, you might have, if you have 4, 5, 6, and 7. So 3 of those picks are probably going to fall out of those categories. You might have 1 pick where it's like, this is a need.
Mm-hmm.
So I could see the Saints do it as this guy fits our system more than linebackers a total need. So for the sake of making the people of New Orleans happy, I'll say dot. Now, again, not because I think he's going to be this outstanding, turn it around type of guy, become the next Demario Davis or whatnot, but because I think that when you get to that part of the draft, if linebacker is still a position where you're like, we could use some depth and this guy fits the system, then we're going to do it. I think for that reason, I'll say dot. Last one of the day. This one is inspired by a comment from our friend Anna, who says, why can't we get a first rounder who can ball? I feel like we always end up with a project player. So New Orleans hasn't really hit it out of the park with a round 1 pick since the 2017 draft, where they did it twice.
Yep.
Might go. This is it's a good argument, and maybe we can have this discussion a little bit when we have a full panel next week. Is 06 or 17 better?
That's a good one.
I think that's a really interesting one. I think when you talk about best single drafts by a team ever, I think those two are definitely in your conversation, top 5, if not top 3. And considering it's the same head coach, I think that's crazy too.
Right. When you get time, by the way, look at the 1981 New Orleans Saints draft. That, for my money, as far as impact players, that was the best draft in franchise history, because you look down and you see how many franchise Hall of Fame players, came to the Saints in that draft. But yeah, I mean, 81, 2006, 2017. I mean, my God, those were great drafts.
So the Saints haven't knocked it out of the park since 2017. Daughter drop. The Saints knock it out in the first round for the first time in 5 years this year.
Uh, I'm going to say Dot. Yeah, and yeah, Dennis Allen better hope so, because frankly, I think his job depends on it. Yeah, we both love the Derek Carr edition, Jamal Williams edition, Saunders, a Shepherd, a defensive tackle. So they definitely brought in some upgraded talent, but there's still holes on this roster. And that if you're going to be a legitimate championship contender, you have to fill those holes, with the draft. You have an aging roster now. Still salary cap issues, but Mickey Loomis juggles that every year, so I'm not concerned about that. Yeah, for Dennis Allen's job security, this better be a dot. They out of their first 3 picks, 2 of them have to make instant impacts in some way, shape, or form. And I like this draft. I really do. I like it better on the much better on the defensive side. That's why I'm kind of ticked off that Ross gets to do the Saints News Network defensive profiles while I do offense. But yeah, the offensive side of the ball has some depth. But I concur with you that I think they go defense in the first couple rounds. If they address defensive line like we thought, the opportunities are there for that player to make an instant impact. And there's a lot of talent here. For the sake of Dennis Allen's job security, I'm going to say dot.
Well, there you have it. And you're right. The 81 draft, given the 81 drafted 12 rounds, a little bit different than it is now. But you have the number 1 pick of the draft that year, ends up being the rookie of the year. And George Rogers, you get Ricky Jackson in that draft, Frank Warren in that draft. Let's see. You get Hokie all the way in round 10.
Mm-hmm. Jimmy Wilkes.
Jimmy Wilkes is the 12th round selection. Yeah, I mean, that in terms of players that ended up being staples in New Orleans for a long time, Brenner was in that draft as well in round 3. You have a lot of guys in that draft that ended up being long mainstays in what New Orleans was able to do in the mid to late 80s, especially during some of those Dome Patrol years.
Speaking of Dome Patrol, 86 was a real good draft too. I mean, that brought in Pat Swilling. If you talk about the 86 draft, that you have to include the USFL refugees, because that brought you in Vaughn Johnson with a number 1 pick. But Reuben Mays, Dalton Hilliard were drafted in 86. Bobby Hebert, of course, Sam Mills came in with the USFL refugees. I mean, 86 was a heck of a haul too.
Right. And Ruben was one of my dad's favorite players too. So one of the I don't want to say forgotten Saints, because I feel like once you wear the black and gold, you're never forgotten. But one of those guys that kind of falls under the radar. And I think George Rogers is one of those guys too, because of the injuries and kind of what happened, especially after that stellar year as a rookie. Just to kind of see the wheels fall off of a guy who was super talented. And from what I understand, still spends a lot of time at South Carolina and in the Carolina area. Is one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet.
I've heard, and I've heard he's sober now and has put together a string of years of sobriety. So I hope that's true, and congratulations if so. Brandon, one more daughter drop, and we'll talk about it next week on our show. It's basically an A, B, or C choice. Saints trade up, trade down, or stand pat at 29.
I think for a year like this, and you kind of alluded to Dennis Allen being on a hot seat, sacrificing draft capital is not the most ideal thing for a coach that's on the hot seat. And considering the Saints don't have boatloads of draft capital, they have more draft capital this year than they've had in a little bit. And a lot of it's later in the draft, right? They have multiple picks in like round 5 or 6. They have multiple, but you guys get what I'm getting at. Get what I'm getting at. So I think it would be smart to just stay put where you are. And if you have to use some of the draft capital later to trade up in rounds like 4 for a guy who slipped out of the 3rd round, you see the Saints do that every year. It seems like they package up. But staying put at 29 and feeling fortunate, mind you, that they even have a 1st round pick this year, I think is the smart way to go about it, because they shouldn't have.
Right.
And
That's
Sean,
why I don't think they trade down either. A, they never do. But B, if they trade down, they're literally trading away the first round pick that they didn't have, that they got back for
right.
Sean Payton. So yeah, while I wouldn't mind them seeing a trade down, 4 or 5 slots and picking up some more picks, this year or next year, I think out of principle, you ain't going to see it happen.
Right. I think the Saints will stay put overall.
Same.
I think that's probably the smartest move to make. But we'll see. We'll see. Well, Bob, I think that's all the time we have for today's show. Next week, we have an exciting show with all of the Saints News Network, and we're going to have a big panel, and we're going to pick each other's brains when it comes to the NFL draft. Obviously, we got a handful of guys that are going to be there at the facility, reporting live and hopping in and out in the following week after that. So we have a lot of exciting things going on. But for some of those player profiles, you still got to push out here as we get closer. And for mock draft coverage, where can everybody follow you on the World Wide Web?
And folks, thank you as always, not only for tuning in tonight, but for your support, Brendan and I personally, and your support of both the Bayou Blitz and Saints News Network. But yeah, I mean, tune in for those draft profiles. I will continue to be doing offensive players until right up until the draft. Individual profiles based off of my own film study. Ross Jackson of the Saints News Network will be doing defense. And you could check out my work, Bob Rose, on Facebook, at Bobby R 2613 on Twitter, and all of our works at the Saints News Network on Facebook or at Saints News on Twitter. And as always, thank you for beefing up our Bayou Blitz page, at Bayou Blitz Pod on Twitter and Bayou Blitz on Facebook. Keep that page growing, folks. We haven't decided how we're going to do the draft coverage yet, but I think, in fact, I know, because Brendan and I have talked about it a little bit, that for at least a portion of the draft coverage, we're going to have a Facebook Live link where you the viewer will have opportunity to kind of slip in and out briefly. To give us your thoughts and impressions. But if we do that kind of thing, we are only going to do it through the Bayou Blitz Facebook page. So if you're a member, thank you. If you're not, it's very simple to join. And don't forget to bring in your friends and family members. That's how we want to make our brand grow. As we tell you week in and week out, this is your show. So you are the ones that are making it grow. You can help that by beefing up our Twitter page and our Facebook feeds.
For myself, you can follow me Twitter and Instagram at BT Boylan. You see it below. Bob's absolutely right. We're going to have a lot of fun with the drafts. I think this is the first year we're actually going to be able to have people pop in and out a little bit. Obviously, just please keep it clean if you guys come on. You guys know how all this stuff.
At least as clean as I do.
Yeah. Bob flirts with the PG-13 line every show, so you guys can do that. But we're really excited about that coverage. Obviously, what we're doing, growing it through Twitter and the Facebook pages. You guys continue to do an awesome job with all of that. So we're excited. I hope you guys are excited with what we're doing with your guys' show. With that said, I also want to take the time to promote my other podcast, which is the Thoughts of Bruin podcast with the Bottom of the Mug Production Network. Had a good guest on, Jenna Shackelford. She has worked in print media here in the Carolinas, and then left the media world to follow some passions that she felt called to in assisting and helping women going through pregnancies in the Carolina area. So gave us some good insight into some of the hidden, I don't want to say dark parts of working in media, but some of the more difficult parts of media that don't necessarily get broadcast to the world if you're in journalism, classes. And then also just talking about some of her struggles with her, not just mental health, but physical health as well later in life, and how that kind of reshaped her ideas of what she wanted to do moving forward, including having multiple emergency brain surgeries as a senior in college. So a lot of really wonderful insight on just life, how things change very quickly for you, and also just understanding that sometimes what you think you should be doing with your life, or what you thought your whole life is what you were going to do, sometimes things change. And sometimes it changes for the better. So make sure you check that out. You can follow me, like I said, on Twitter, Instagram. Links are there. And we're going to put Bob on the spot because, that podcast is about interviewing your average Joes, your everyday people, and talking about their incredible life stories. And I know Bob has talked about it a little bit on this show over the last 6 or 7 months about some of his journey as a volleyball player, as a dad, some of your struggles and with alcoholism. So with all of that, Bob, this is your formal invitation. We'd love to have you on that podcast to talk about your life story as well. And we hope we can get that knocked out fairly soon, sooner than later.
Brendan, I'd be honored. I'd never say no to you.
Be careful. Don't say that out. No, dude, you got to be careful, because now I'm going to come asking for lots of things.
Well, I feel confident that I could say I'll never say no to you, because you know how poor I am financially. So I know you won't be asking me for money anytime soon. But no, I'm so proud of the work that you have done. Outside of Saints News, you and I have grown together and got to know each other, as colleagues with Saints News. So I'm humbled at being asked, and I would be absolutely honored to join you guys.
Well, there you have it. So now you guys have another podcast to tune into, and that one, Bob can curse as much as he wants. So that might be it.
Is that kind of like the 30 for 30 of Bob Rose? Because we won't be talking football. So I mean, that's what did VH1 used to do the series on? Behind the dark side behind the music of these groups.
Yeah. Behind the music, behind the music of Bob Rose.
the dark side of Bob Rose, yeah.
Oh man, yeah. We'll definitely tease it like that or something. Have to. But guys, thanks so much for tuning in for the Bayou Blitz. We'll see you guys next week. In the meantime, like Bob said, you got Bob Rose, you have Kyle T. Mosley, you have John Hendricks, and Ross Jackson. Like I retire and you guys go hit a home run with a first round pick. Like, only if the Saints could do that. Come on.
Right. Right. They did a poor job of initially replacing Drew Brees. The Saints did, but you step aside and you're right. We get a first round pick, and now I feel like I'm being forced out the door, but that's okay.
That's okay. No, but Ross is incredible. So you guys have an all-star lineup there, an all-pro lineup over at Saints News worth of draft coverage. So make sure you to check those guys out to know everything that they're doing over there. And then make sure you're with us all next week as we're all together to kind of preview for the final time as a group what the Saints will be doing in the 2023 NFL draft. Until then, follow us both and enjoy the rest of your week. We'll see you next week. Until then, find your peace, spread love, practice positivity, and we'll see you on Wednesday with a full house previewing the 2023 NFL draft for the New Orleans Saints. We'll see you then.